This video is by Straight Goods News, SGNews.ca.
The purpose of this morning's briefing is to give you an opportunity to learn more about Bill C-377 regarding financial transparency for labor organizations, now that the bill has passed by the House of Commons, a vote of 147 to 135, and has moved on to the Senate. Joining me today are my colleagues, the Honourable Maxime Bernier and Senator Nicole Eaton. Minister Bernier has kindly agreed to offer French language commentary on the bill this morning. And I'm pleased to announce that Senator Eaton has graciously agreed to become the bill's sponsor in the Senate. Before we take your questions, I'd like to note just a few things about the bill. First, I believe that the bill has been placed before the Senate is actually an improved bill. Several amendments were made to C-377 last night that improve protections for individual privacy and reduce the cost of the bill to the government. Second, I'm hopeful that the Senate can give my bill timely consideration. Should the Senate decide to pass the bill in the coming months, then labor organizations would be filing their first year's return for the 2014 fiscal year by 2015. This will allow Canadians the opportunity to see how this legislation actually works before the next election. Finally, I'm thankful to so many of my Conservative colleagues who have helped me to get C-377 to this stage. While some have erroneously suggested that this bill was fast-tracked, the fact is I was actually drawn the first in private members' business at the very beginning of this Parliament, and it has taken more than a year and a half to get to the halfway mark in the legislative process.
I just wanted to ask you, many people think that this will not support a constitutional challenge for privacy reasons and others. And you mentioned that the first filing will be in 2015. So are you afraid at all that this could be destroyed by courts even before it begins? In drafting the bill, we brought it to a variety of constitutional experts in Canada, people who are at the top of that industry or that are experts in that field, and they assured us the way that it's drafted would sustain any constitutional challenge. Now, that's not to say that opposition to the bill will not try and use the courts to prevent its implementation, but I'm very confident that it will withstand any such challenge.
What do you think we're going to find in 2015? Are we going to discover that unions are models of fiscal probity, or are we going to find examples of questionable spending?
Well, my presumption going into this is that this is an opportunity for labor organizations to increase the confidence that Canadians have that they function healthily and with financial integrity. I have no reason to believe that anything suspect would be disclosed. Other people have speculated to that effect, but there's nothing that would suggest to me at this point that there's anything to hide. I think this is, as I said, a chance for labor organizations to dispel the myth, perhaps, that some people have labeled with them that they aren't as transparent as they should be, or have information that might be considered questionable. That's not the approach that I've taken in drafting this legislation. My presumption has always been that they offer a valuable service to society and should be given the benefit of the doubt.
Can you name any constitutional experts that you've consulted?
They would like to move on now to consider the RAND formula and getting rid of the RAND formula. What do you think of that?
Well, I've been focusing on this bill, and I've obviously been aware of the discussions around the RAND formula, but it's not one that I've put my attention to, and I have no comment on it at this time.
Can you name any of the constitutional experts you've consulted?
I could, except I don't have their consent to disclose their names.
I asked you that 2 weeks ago, and you've had 2 weeks to ask them. It's not a casual question. We can't find any attorney in this country who thinks that this is constitutional. A couple of them say, well, it'll be worth a shot. But we can't find anyone who thinks that the government has a constitutional right to find out what a union leader's health benefits are and put them on a government website.
The reality
Senator,
is,
you're shaking your head. Would you like to comment on the constitutionality?
The reality is that Canadian labor organizations already disclose this information, but not to any Canadian source, to the U.S. Department of Labor. And you could look it up on the U.S. Department of Labor website.
Your experts.
Yes, I appreciate that. As I said, if you want to find out about Canadian labour organizations, right now, you can look a number of them up on the U.S. Department of Labor website. This is the whole issue that first got my interest in this subject, is that I could find out more on another country's website. Why is it that Canadians don't have the same access to the same information, the same level of disclosure, including the salary disclosures that you were referring to? Now, in response to your specific question, when we spoke 2 weeks ago, you did not ask me to follow up, and so I obviously did not feel an obligation to do so. But I can assure you that we have not taken this issue lightly. We have consulted broadly with a variety of stakeholders to ensure that this legislation is compliant with the Constitution.
Mr. Hiebert, can you name a single pension fund manager who supports this bill?
We consulted with the Association of Pension Plans in the drafting of this bill. They've provided us feedback. I'm not aware that any of them has endorsed the legislation.
They said they didn't like the bill, didn't they?
Not to me, they haven't. But we did. That's fine. We did consult with them, and we took their suggestions to improve the legislation, which is part of the amendments that we saw last night. Now, in terms of the other disclosure that happens in Canada, keep in mind that since 1977, charities have had to disclose similar information, including salary information. So any Canadian can look it up on the CRA website and see the salaries of the administrative or executive officials of Canadian charities. And so that's a classic example of where we already have disclosure for institutions that receive substantial public benefits. And all this legislation does is extend that same principle to a new class of institutions that also receive substantial public benefits. Let's keep in mind that labour organizations receive, or Canadian taxpayers defer around $500 million a year in tax benefits or tax receipts because of the tax preferences we provide labour organizations. So it's no small amount that we make available in support of these institutions, and I believe there's a reciprocal responsibility for these institutions to provide some transparency and accountability. We're doing it with Crown corporations, we're doing it now with Native reserves, and Canadian parliamentarians have had to be subject to this kind of disclosure.
That's a
for a
false
while.
argument.
Mr. Hiebert. Labour organizations make, because they, at the same time, they say that they already collect this information and make it available to their members. And in the same breath, they say that that they can't make it available because it would be too costly to do so. You can't have it both ways. Either you collect, any responsible labour organization already collects this information. And the same argument was made back in 1959 when this same legislation was introduced in the United States. And the reality is that they were forced to disclose also the time and cost associated with their disclosure. My bill does not require that, but their numbers indicated that the estimates came in at 5%, or the actual cost was 5% of the estimated cost that they anticipated it was going to cost to comply. So, as I said, responsible labour organizations already collect this information. For many of them, it might be as simple as getting a software upgrade. I'm told that a variety of electronic software tax preparers are already looking at incorporating this into their platforms, and it should be a very simple thing for them to include.
Sponsoring a bill the Canadian Bar Association has said is unbalanced and as clearly unconstitutional as any bill they can see, that every manager of the largest pension funds in Canada say is pointless, they don't understand the point of it. And the constitutional experts that we consult say is a lead pipe cinch regulation of unions in non-federally regulated sectors is up to the provinces. Privy Council 1925. You're just making it up. Senator, comment, please.
I'd really like the Senator to comment. I appreciate that, but I think it's important for the public to recognize that the amendments that were introduced and passed last night now exclude pensions. They are no longer required to disclose.
In fairness,
any registered pension, we list it in the bill, and so all of the concerns that we've heard over the last year about the privacy concerns of Canadians as it relates to pensions and the beneficiaries of the benefits that they provide has been addressed. They are no longer subject to disclosure within this legislation.